The simple endocrine pathway is the basic type of endocrine pathway. It involves a stimulus, endocrine cells, hormones, blood vessels, target cells, and a response. In the simple endocrine pathway, endocrine cells directly respond to a stimulus that can be either an internal change, such as a drop in pH, or an external signal, such as a decrease in temperature. The stimulus, whether external or internal, directly affects an endocrine cell, causing it to release hormones that travel through blood vessels to all of the cells in the body. Eventually, the hormones reach target cells that respond to the hormone due to the presence of specific receptors that can be internal, as in the case of lipid-soluble hormones like testosterone, or external, as in the case of water-soluble hormones. When the hormone attaches to the receptor on a target cell, it initiates a signal transduction pathway that magnifies the signal and translates it into a form that the cell can understand. This signal transduction pathway then initiates a response that, in the case of low pH in the duodenum in digestion, is a release of basic bicarbonate. Simple endocrine pathways often involve negative feedback. This means that the response to a pathway dampens the stimulus and lessens the need for a further response by decreasing the stimulus that initiated the endocrine pathway that culminated in the response.
Neuroendocrine pathways are the pathways that link the nervous and endocrine systems together. Neuroendocrine systems involve a stimulus, endocrine cells, hormones, blood vessels, target cells, and a response, in addition to sensory neurons and invertebrates, the hypothalamus. When hormone pathways are triggered by an outside signal, they often involve the nervous system. In a neuroendocrine pathway, a stimulus activates a sensory neuron that conveys information to the hypothalamus, the part of the brain that is involved in maintaining homeostasis. Signals from the hypothalamus are next sent to the pituitary gland that is located at the base of the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland consists of two parts: the posterior pituitary, that is an extension of the hypothalamus and releases neurohormones into the anterior pituitary, or sometimes the bloodstream, and the anterior pituitary, that receives and synthesizes and then releases hormones into the bloodstream. When hypothalamus signals the posterior pituitary, it triggers the release of hormones from the anterior pituitary. These hormones travel through the body via the bloodstream, reach a target cell, and initiate a response, just like hormones involved in simple endocrine pathways. The hormones released by the anterior pituitary are often tropic hormones and initiate the release of hormones by target cells. Conversely, the posterior pituitary could release neurohormones into the bloodstream, as in the case of lactation. These neurohormones travel through the body and initiate a response in target cells, just like regular hormones do. One example of a neurohormone is oxytocin, which regulates lactation. The response to oxytocin is an example of positive feedback, meaning that it leads to an increase in the stimulus, driving the pathway to completion rather than to a balance point. This type of pathway is less common than negative feedback pathways. One specific example of a neuroendocrine pathway is the production of thyroid hormone. First, the amount of thyroid hormone in the bloodstream drops below a normal level. This stimulates a sensory neuron on the hypothalamus. In response, the hypothalamus secretes a neurohormone called thyrotropin, TRH, into the anterior pituitary. In the anterior pituitary, TRH stimulates the secretion of thyroid-stimulating hormone, TSH, into the bloodstream. TSH travels through the body, eventually reaching thyroid cells that have specific TSH receptors. TSH stimulates these thyroid cells to secrete thyroid hormones like Th3 and Th4 into the bloodstream. As a result of increased secretion of thyroid hormones, there is a lower need for the release of TRH, and the stimulus is dampened. Additionally, thyroid hormones block TRH and TSH release to prevent overproduction of thyroid hormones. This multi-step, multi-hormone pathway is known as a hormone cascade pathway, as the hypothalamus acts on the anterior pituitary that acts on thyroid cells that then act on other body cells.